Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are discussing the most discussed topic in the world, artificial intelligence. It's something you just can't escape. While I was coming here from to office today, from my home, I counted around 18 ads of AI on various signboards and billboards. And to speak nothing of, every time I switch on my computer, every piece of software and every app on my phone offers me an AI feature. AI is being pumped into our everyday life at a breathtaking pace. And it has rightly led to, I think, a lot of interesting conversations about how countries can keep up in this race, how they can secure access to technology, how they can ensure supply chain resilience, and how they can attract data centers and hyperscalers into their countries. And India as well, not to lose out on this race, has gone all in and head first into this AI race. And even ISAS has been hosting a lot of conversations around those questions and a lot of research around those questions as well. But at ISAS, we also wanted to take a look at other aspects of AI policy, which particularly the ones which are not really at the forefront of discourse today, right? Especially as everybody is very gung ho about AI, what are the various policy challenges that are likely to emanate out of uh, this inclusion of this technology into all aspects and all facets of our life at such a deep level and integration at that level? How does it? How do we expect AI is going to affect our national life and our everyday life? Um, and I think that this kind of discussion is relevant not just for India, and a lot of this can be applied to several countries across the world. Um, in particular, I was thinking of at least five buckets of issues that come up, and very quickly I'll just run through them. I think that one question important is, of course, about the effect of what should be the policy response of the impact of AI on jobs, especially in a country like India, where there's already a job crisis and where the most lucrative job is IT sector, and AI promises to replace IT sector most likely more than any other jobs. Um, how AI affects global geopolitics, especially balance of power, when if AI has been promised to be this huge source of power, and how will that change the balance of power on an international system, and how do then countries anticipate that change in balance of power, and what do they do about it? Um, Third is, what can we expect in terms of AI's impact on Indian society, especially the issues of caste, gender relations, income inequality, ethnic relations, and religion relations. Um, Fourth is, how do we think about corporate power in AI, especially if few companies which are located in only two countries, United States and China, are not only going to be richer than most other GDPs in the world, but also will have control over such a critical technology. And fifth, I think, which I feel like is often very foo-fooed, but I think is very important, which is, how do we think about ethics in AI? Not one in terms of how do we use AI, where do we use AI, and we don't. And the second is how ethical AI is itself, right? And it being in some ways an amoral piece of software. How do we think about ethics and how AI thinks about ethics? Um, I can't imagine that we will get into all these issues in this one particular discussion, but we can start this conversation, and hopefully, we can have many such conversations over the coming months and years. And I'm very glad to kick us off for this conversation, we have with us Dr. Sushant Kumar. Dr. Sushant Kumar is an assistant professor and an assistant dean at General School of Government and Public Policy. He is also a fellow of Cyril Shroff Center at AI Law and Regulation. Um, um, he was previously at Harvard Kennedy School as a fellow, and he has a PhD from Northeastern University, Boston. And his work is mostly on science, technology, and society issues, especially on the ethics and governance of artificial intelligence. In fact, in the last 1 year, if you have been following discussions about AI policy in Indian media and Indian newspapers, various places, you probably have come across his work. And some of it has been very insightful and very out of the box, and not the usual approach to AI that we often hear. So I'm really glad to welcome Dr. Sushant Kumar. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandeep, for such a insightful and thought-provoking introduction for the session. Um, this kind of opens up a lot of important questions that we are faced with as far as AI is concerned. I'll try to do justice with as many as I can. I already had my presentation planned before you spoke, so we'll see what we can do about that. Hello, everyone. I am Sushant. I teach here at Jindal School of Government and Public Policy. Um, we are all caught up in this moment where AI is around us everywhere, and everyone has an opinion on how they think about technology, and rightly so they should, because that's how technology interacts with society and everyone, and that's where the democracy of technology is such a beautiful thing. So it should not be like a repository. It should not be just like a domain of some experts who can think about AI, but we need to have larger democratic conversation about the technology in general. And that is the larger purview of this particular session as well, where we're going to talk about some of the very, very human and societal concerns about AI. And I would like to caution the viewers in the sense that this is not going to be a techno-optimistic sort of conversation. It's going to be a highly critical conversation. We are going to largely be provocative about how the technology is interacting with society, especially in India, and what are the issues that are coming out, right? Um, so Sandeep has already introduced me, so I'll just like try to plunge into presentation directly. So I'll try to share my screen. Um, do I have the right? Okay. You can see my screen, everyone? All right. Um, try to minimize this. Okay. Um, so this is the title of the conversation, Missing Pieces of AI Policy Discourse in India. We will start with this visual, which is, okay, you can see my screen fully. Um, So this is where we are trying to start this conversation with a story of extractive technology, like how AI is basically this technology which is extracting all sorts of inputs from our physical environment. And they can be data, which is like the first important element on which the models are trained. Um, it extracts labor from humankind. It extracts raw material like rare earth materials, which basically makes GPUs and other components of the technology. It extracts energy in a tremendous amount. It extracts water, and then it gives you some kind of output. So this presentation will touch upon most of these extractive sort of components that this technology is not existing out in the cloud or somewhere in the universe, which is not really physical in nature. It is a really physical technology, and its effects are very, very material, right? And these material are data, labor, rare earth materials, energy, water, which is everything that is important for humankind and is around us. So we will see how these extractive factors are playing out in the current societal moment, right? Um, so I've titled my presentation around certain missing pieces. I'm going to talk about four or five of them. And the first and the most important one, which is around us everywhere, is the data center story, right? On the right is this news clip about one of the data centers in India, in Uttar Pradesh, which is the central state of India. Um, and there are very few investigative journalistic pieces like this, mind you. I think this is the one, and there is another one which has recently come up in the last several years of data center expansion. There is like one or two investigative journalistic pieces into how these data centers are affecting the physical environment. Um, so this one is near Uttar Pradesh, and it has already leading to different kinds of water crisis, depletion of groundwater table, huge amount of energy extraction. And the biggest reason the data centers are expanding in India right now is because of this supply gap, where India is the powerhouse of data for the entire world. Like we have almost like 20% of the world's data, but we just have 3% of data centers for the record. So there is a mismatch between that number, which is acting as the magnet for attracting foreign investment into data center space in India, because there is a lot to still do. There's more data to harvest. So based on that reason, there is a lot of data center activity happening, and these infrastructures are extractive for like energy and water reasons, which most of you are aware of. Just some numbers. 1 megawatt data center consumes up to like 25.5 million liters of water each year. And on a per day level, 70 kiloliters, like 70,000 liters, which is like a tremendous amount. And just for the cooling purpose itself, there are other activities also going around in the data center, which is outside of this. Um, but 70 kiloliters of water per day, and most of these data centers are located in water-starved regions, which is also something that is happening. And the impacts of these data centers is already visible, like the Yotta data center story, which this one is already leading to dropping of water table from 30 meter to 180 to 250 meters, which is a six-fold to eight-fold depletion in water tables height, which is leading to all sorts of reliance on private vendors, rent seeking. So you have to imagine, if I'm assuming like a lot of the audience here is Indian or sounds like Indian names. So if you are aware of the water situation in India, there is a lot of private vendors, there's a lot of rent seeking happening. So all of that is further fueled by data center expansion. And another bigger problem is that these data center facilities lead to low skill roles like security and housekeeping, and only for a small amount of time. So, like, here is the difference between a data center and the good old like factories of industrial revolution. Those would require manpower for a long amount of time. But data centers, once they are up and running, they can survive with very few labor, which can sustain them for a long amount of time. So they're not labor intensive, right? And most of the labor which is even required in their upkeep, a lot of that is imported from abroad. So like if Meta is going to partner with Reliance to put up a data center in, let's say, Vizag, a lot of the managerial and higher level roles are already taken by the big tech companies, wherever the source of the AI company is. And India or the local community gets to have low skilled manual kind of roles like security and housekeeping, that also for like a small amount of time. So there is a lot of localization of risks in terms of how the water extraction happens. And the other part is the electricity consumption as well. Given that these centers consume a lot of electricity, it puts a lot of load on the local discoms, which end up inflating the bills of the other community members because they have to put up new electricity lines, new infrastructure to power these data centers, and somebody has to foot that bill. That bill is distributed amongst the community itself. So everyone ends up in that locality getting higher bills because of the data center. So inflation of electricity bill, water extraction, a lot of already there is a lot of power disruption happening in India. Like there is the grid is very unstable. So we all live in spaces where there is a lot of power interruption happening all the time. So that gets further accentuated. And the biggest problem perhaps is the problem of data colonialism, which a lot of people who have some understanding of how historical industrial revolution happened, we were the colonies where data raw material used to be extracted and finished products would be sold back. And similar kind of story is happening with data centers where our data is harvested for insights and for training the frontier AI models, which are owned by big tech companies, Silicon Valley companies, and the finished product, which is like ChatGPT or Claude or other frontier AI models, they are sold back to markets in global south. So like India is the second biggest open AI market already and will soon become the biggest one. So this is a similar kind of colonial relation where the raw material is extracted without giving the benefit back to the local community in proportion to the benefit they should deserve, because data is pretty much everything for AI inference. So if you're extracting data from the community, I have not come across any, for instance, agreement where there has been any kind of value distribution being talked about, in the sense like the profit distribution or giving back to the community in any way. If anything, they're like only taking back or taking away, like water or electricity. Land displacement is another big problem, like any other infrastructure problem. So that is where we are starting with the data center story. And this visual just gives you an idea of water stress across countries, and you can see India is the most water stressed country. It has, and these numbers next to the countries in parentheses are the number of data centers they already have. So India just has 248 data centers right now, and its water stress is already the highest, and with a good margin compared to like US, for instance, has 3390, almost 3400 data centers, and it still has much less water stress. So you can situate the development of water stress of data centers in this context of water stress as well. A lot of Indian cities are already out of groundwater and they completely rely on private water suppliers. So this is a serious problem that we are talking about, and it's not even talked about as much that it should. Um, and this slide then talks about critical political leadership, which is basically missing about data center story. This picture is of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is a representative from New York, and she's holding this jar of water from a data center in Georgia, which has polluted water around it very badly, led to depletion of water table, inflation of electricity bills. All the problems that we just talked about is happening right there. And they have introduced this, along with Bernie Sanders, have introduced this AI Data Center Moratorium Act, which talks about a thorough environmental assessment of these infrastructure before they are put up. Similar kind of things are not happening in India, if at all. State is incentivizing data centers. And I just have some examples here from like Uttar Pradesh and Telangana. And the story is similar across different states where the state is offering capital subsidies, duty exemption on land, electricity duty exemption. Land is rather provided to data centers at concessional rates in dedicated spaces like IT parks and IT corridors. And then there's also this single window clearance system, fast track approval systems where all the environmental concerns are set aside, and these things are rather like accelerated. The approval is accelerated to attract foreign investment in this space. So you can look at the gargantuan gap that is there in terms of how we are looking at the data center development that is happening in India compared to, for instance, some of the Western countries. So there is a lot of critical political leadership that is required to talk about some of the very important concerns. The second piece of the puzzle, which is not also talked about as much, is the labor force story. And this visual is talking about something called ghost work. And it is called ghost work because we are talking about data annotation. Data annotation is pretty much the backbone of AI training, where a lot of workers, especially in global south countries, in Africa, in Philippines, in countries of Southeast Asia and South Asia, they laboriously and arduously train AI models to recognize everything as they exist in the real world. So, like for instance, this visual on the right is like whether this is an aeroplane or it's a car, it's a bicycle. All of this annotation is done by human labor force, day in and day out. And it happens behind the screen. Nobody knows about it as much. So it's called ghost work, that somebody is doing this work for us. And India is very, in a clandestine manner, developing annotation army. Um, Much like the IT back office labor force development that happened back in the days in 90s, where India became like the back office for basically taking care of all the software work for the Silicon Valley and much of the Western countries. Now, for the AI economy, it is doing the data annotation work, right? This is happening a lot. And this work is repetitive, it is labor intensive. And most of these roles involve repetitive tagging of objects with no coding or advanced AI exposure, which really creates a gap between the aspiration and the reality. So a lot of these jobs are advertised with like, oh, you will get a lot of AI training and cutting edge technology exposure. But much of it is just like very repetitive, menial job of day in and day out, just labeling objects. So they are very low paid, and they further accentuate the gigification of economy. Gigification of economy on the visual on the left is already India has the most amount of online gig workers in the world. And gig economy, if you are aware of from urban economics, it is a very insecure employment situation where the workers do not get any kind of social security. They are It's usually underpaid, extremely underpaid rather, and leads to a lot of like different kinds of labor exploitation. Um, and the data center expansion and the data annotation work that is happening is further accentuating that kind of gigification of economy. And most importantly, this data annotation work also exposes workers to graphic, violent, and psychologically damaging content. Day in and day out, they have to go through. So imagine social media. A lot of the content there is very violent. A lot of the content is very extremist. Also, it is very sexually charged as well. Most of the times, all of those contents is being refined, is being looked at by human labor in the background before we get the sanitized content in front of our screen. So, and that happened with Meta glasses also recently, where a lot of Kenyan workers got exposed to very graphic sort of content which was coming from Meta sunglasses. A lot of it was like nude content, a lot of it was very intimate content and private conversations, violent content being telecasted to workers in Kenya day in and day out. So that data annotation work is really becoming like the bread and butter of Indian economy as the AI disruption we are facing. And this this slide talks about another aspect of the labor force story, which is about the egocentric data, which is the data captured directly from an individual perspective using wearable, like this woman on the right is wearing a camera mounted on her head. We'll just see this clip for a couple of minutes to give you a very good idea of what is happening with egocentric data, because humanoid robots need this kind of data to train themselves. And this is happening. This is another part of labor force story that is happening with AI in India. So I'll just play this and you see.
Karur is a very small town in Tamil Nadu, it's southern state, and we don't have a lot of jobs in these places. We visited this textile manufacturing factory in Karur. There was a station where they are stitching something, there's a station where they're folding something, there's a station where they're ironing something. And almost in all of the stations, some of the workers were wearing cameras on their foreheads. It was either a GoPro, and some of them were also wearing meta glasses. We have 200 people, and we utilize at least 60 people for this robotics area. They wear it every day, at least for 6 to 8 hours per day. They have the additional benefit of 10,000 rupees per month. இது போய்கிட்டு இருக்கு. 6 மாசமா தினமும் காலையில வந்த உடனே ரெக்கார்ட் பண்ண ஆரம்பிப்போம். மிஷின் ஆன் ஆகி ரெடி ஆன உடனே ரெக்கார்ட் பண்ண ஆரம்பிப்போம். அதுக்கப்புறம் திருப்பி டீ பிரேக் அண்ட் லஞ்ச் பிரேக்ல மட்டும் கிளாஸ் ரிமூவ் பண்ணியிருப்போம். மற்றபடி எல்லா நேரத்துலையும் நாங்கள் செய்யற எல்லா வேலையும் இதுல ரெக்கார்ட் ஆக்கிட்டு இருப்போம். அப்படி நினைக்கல, ஏன்னா எல்லா இடத்துலையும் ஹியூமனுக்கான ஒரு ப்ரையாரிட்டி இருந்துகிட்டே தானே இருக்கும். ஸோ ரோபோட் இருந்தாலும் இட்ஸ் ஹெல்ப் ஃபார் ஹியூமன், நாட் ஃபார் த ஒர்க். Looks very dystopian to start with. Is this what humans will become? Are we training robots now? Are we the fodder for robots?
So I'll let you see the small clip in your own time, but just wanted to introduce the audience to what is happening with egocentric data. It is slowly and very a lot of the informal economy is being captured by this kind of work where labor is itself kind of getting this data trained, recorded day in and day out to replace themselves eventually. And they're getting small incentive in the meantime, but most of them are not even aware. Like this worker was saying that human work will always be preferred or prioritized. That is an open question with humanoid robots and manual work. Whichever kind of work can be structured properly can be taken up by AI. And egocentric data is just trying to prove that. So estimates are suggesting there is 1 billion humanoid robots possible by 2050, which is going to need a lot of egocentric data. And the cheapest places to collect such data is global south, countries like India, Brazil, Kenya.
Sushant,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but after you played the video, your audio, what you're speaking, your audio volume has gone down. So if you can just turn it back up.
Okay. Is it any better right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm hoping, like, let me know if you face any interruption in my audio. Okay. So from the labor force story, we will move towards the third piece of the puzzle, which is missing, is the education sector story. And here is a news piece item from Norway, for instance, which is imposing almost like near ban on AI in elementary school. So Prime Minister of Norway himself, he has suggested that using AI increases the risk that younger children skip important steps in their education of reading, writing, doing mathematical calculations. These are like the bread and butter of cognitive learning and the development that happens early on in a child's development. And there are other countries also which are moving in the direction. And it is not just AI, it is situated in the larger context of digital technology itself. So they're also planning to ban children from using social media until they are turning 16. Australia also did that very recently. And they are proposing to, in fact, bring legislation to fund use of more books in the classroom, reversing the trend towards computer tablets. So they're going back to the old age, old school techniques of reading and writing from hand and reading from books. Um, and they have adopted some kind of a graded approach that at least in the very early ages of 6 to 13, they are completely using AI, completely banning use of AI. 14 to 16, some kind of cautious use with supervision from teachers. And 17 to 19, they are allowing the use of AI. So that appropriate use of AI, by the way, not even like a unabashed use for preparing them for future education work. So this is what is happening in Norway, and it is not the only story. So MIT came up with this research um, last year, which was about cognitive offloading. So they basically split the participants of this study in three groups. One was using AI, the second group was using only Google, and the third group was not using any of the digital sort of assistants. And they asked them to write essays. And what they measured was the group which was relying on AI had the most amount of loss of cognitive development. Over the course of time, they really did the MRI and mapped the development of the brain. And they figured basically AI is directly related to accumulation of cognitive debt. So imagine it's something like you're going to a gym and you're doing the workout by yourself leads to muscle development compared to sitting around letting just watching, for instance, videos of workout that will not really, it will lead to muscle depletion if at all. Similar things is happening with AI and cognitive development. The more you use your muscle, your cognitive muscles, the better you become with imagination. That's why like reading is something which is preferred a lot by um, most of the leaders around the world because it really helps improve our cognitive skills. So AI is reversing all of that. And another study by MIT very recently this year came out about the ability to decipher fake news. So they again, what they found out that almost like how GPS has weakened our ability to navigate, AI can also make us worse at detecting fake news. So information deciphering different kinds of information is an important part of cognitive development as well, and that is also something AI is inhibiting. And they call it something like AI dependency paradox, where participants who relied on AI systems to verify facts, they actually got worse over the course of time in detecting misinformation when the chatbot was taken away. So what happens is like in the short term, your productivity will increase when you're using AI, but when the AI assistance is taken away, the actual productivity like falls down much more drastically. So that is again pointing out how cognitive development is impaired by the use of AI. And at the same time, in India, if you see, OpenAI is already like kind of signing MOUs with schools, with ministries. So All India Council for Technical Education, which is the apex body for administration of technical education in India, they very recently signed a memorandum of understanding with OpenAI to empower students and faculty. And these bullet points are directly from AICT website. Um, and the way they are also phrasing some of these things is interesting. So OpenAI has announced to distribute 5 lakh free ChatGPT licenses to students and teachers in India as a step towards AI-driven learning, innovation, and research. And the last point on this bullet is this collaboration is set to redefine education by integrating cutting edge AI tools into classrooms, empowering educators and learners alike. So if you looked at the Norway slide and all the MIT research findings, and there are a plethora of other research findings out there, which is all pointing to how AI can be harmful for cognitive learning in the formative years of a child, especially. And what is happening with India, there cannot be a bigger gap. So this is another missing piece that I wanted to point out for the audience. And we're almost heading towards the last parts of the missing puzzle, which is the concentration of wealth conversation that has to happen. And a lot of the data center infrastructure, a lot of the data annotation work, a lot of the AI infrastructure expansion in general is happening in global south, including in countries like India, with local partners, right? So this person on the right is Mukesh Ambani, who is the chairman of Reliance Corporation. So Reliance is collaborating with Meta to have biggest data centers of AI in the country. So they have pledged over like $110 billion over the next 7 years in AI data centers, renewable energy. That is also interesting, by the way. It's not just data center. They're also thinking about renewable energy at the same time. So there's also this greenwashing happening that they are not really extracting as much energy from the grid. They are trying to have more renewable energy source, but it doesn't really compute the kind of energy that is required. It's not just the energy; also there's also water. There is also land, and the exact calculation, the way democracy works in India, it's not as transparent. So God knows exactly how much of renewable energy is even like supplied for these infrastructures, but they remain highly extractive as it is. And other companies also, like Adani, for instance, also is partnering with another big tech company in US, and they're also planning to invest around $100 billion to build green energy powered AI ready data centers by 2035. So a lot of this is happening. There is like biggest levels of conglomerates who have very deep pockets, and they are collaborating with big tech companies in Silicon Valley to expand the data center of infrastructure in India. And along with concentration of wealth happens concentration of power. Concentration of wealth cannot happen without concentration of power, because the state plays a definitive role of a gatekeeper, right? Because behind data center expansion, there is a lot of different kind of regulatory permissions that is required. There is a lot of land parcel which is required. There is environmental clearances, and then there is access to gigawatts of power, which is subsidized by the state. And we saw some examples from UP and Telangana in the earlier slides where state is incentivizing these data centers. By the way, the picture on the right is from the AI summit where the prime minister of the country is holding hands with the big tech CEOs from across the world. It really like sums up very beautifully in like one visual, like how the like very few people, countable number of people from the world are pretty much running the entire AI landscape. And the union budget is also of India, the latest union budget in 2026, underscores it provided a lot of tax holidays for the hyperscalers or the data centers till 2047. So the state is really like pushing the expansion of data centers very, very deliberately. Um, and they're also closing the loop between political centralization and economic monopolization, right? And the way it works that the state relies on these big tech companies as national champions to execute its vision of digital sovereignty. So India talks a lot about AI sovereignty, digital sovereignty. So they need these big tech conglomerates, local giants to execute that vision. And in return, these corporate entities receive regulatory smoothing, subsidized access to public resources, different kinds of subsidies that we talked about earlier, and the protection from foreign hyperscalers. So India has now DPDP Act, which shields localized, which basically requires localization of data. So it prefers local data vendors compared to the foreign ones. So that is how this whole like closing of loop happens between political centralization and economic monopolization. So concentration of wealth and concentration of power happens all together, which are other parts of the puzzle which is not talked about as much in the policy discourse of the country. Um, Almost trying to wind up the conversation here. I think I'm doing okay with time. Sandeep, you can let me know if I am running too much over, but I'll try to conclude very, very quickly now. So there's a tremendous gap in rhetoric and reality on AI governance, ethics, and safety. Um, so India's policy discourse on AI started with Niti Aayog, which is India's apex policy think tank, coming out in 2018 with responsible AI paper. So the first policy document of India on AI was titled Responsible AI, and the subtitle was AI for all, hashtag AI for all. So that was the rhetoric, and still like the AI summit also, they have been talking about using AI for different kinds of socioeconomic development. So there's always this conversation of inclusion using AI and using AI to bridge the social gaps, socioeconomic gaps. So there is a lot of that rhetoric happening, but the reality, as we just went through the different slides, how the data center expansion is happening, what is happening with the labor force, what is happening in the education sector, what is happening with concentration of power and wealth. So there's tremendous amount of gap between what is the rhetoric and what is the reality, right? And a lot of the criticism of technology is now confounded with being negative, being Luddite, being anti-national. And these are important points because AI has been increasingly being securitized in conversations where, as a technology itself, it has been made to a matter of national security almost. So if you have come across this news of US government banning the use of Fable 5 and Mythos by foreign countries because they were too powerful, and the US government did not want the technology to land in the hands of foreign powers or the rogue elements. So countries are already looking at this technology as some sort of extension of the sovereign power. And that is where the notion of geopolitical AI race, it's almost like arms race that was happening in nuclear era, in space technology also back in the days. Similar thing is happening in AI space now. Countries are looking at this technology as some sort of extension of its geopolitical might. So any kind of conversation on criticism of the technology or different aspects of the value chain, which is not centering human prosperity or human development, is now being taken as an anti-national sort of conversation. In fact, US has banned criticism of data centers also. It was one of the news items where the government is considering almost like banning such conversation, which is talking about criticism of data centers as some kind of anti-national activity. And then rhetoric of AI and digital sovereignty is used to enable concentration of wealth, power, and silence dissent. So the nexus between wealth and power that we were just talking about, this rhetoric of AI sovereignty, digital sovereignty, is often used to enable such concentration because, and we are living in a time where there has been an upsurge of nationalistic concerns around the world, and such politics kind of enables this kind of crony capitalism and like kind of collusion between corporations and the political power to enable certain visions of future, which is now unleashing in front of us in the space of AI as well. But that rides on concentration of wealth and power and silencing the kinds of voices which are not desirable, and critical voices are one of them. So ultimately, we need a lot of critical perspectives on AI to thrive alongside those of AI optimism, because like there has to be heterogeneity of ideas. There has to be diversification of ideas around us. There has to be different kinds of antithetical conversation happening on AI as well, along with optimistic conversation for a better synthesis to happen. So critical conversations are important, and they are about human development. They are about human prosperity. They are about society's prosperity. So these serve a very important role in the AI rhetoric in general. So I will end my conversation over there, and we will open the conversation to audience perhaps. Thank you.
Thanks, Sushant. That was a very interesting and very provocative, as promised, very provocative conversation. Although I imagine in some ways it's not that provocative. It's just it's a perspective that kind of sometimes get forgotten given the very different kind of conversation and the direction of conversation that we're going in. And that's why perhaps, what you had said before we started the conversation, that you were going to take a particularly critical perspective, should be seen within the context of the fact that so much of what we talk about AI is so optimistic that perhaps a little bit of going overboard in a critical perspective is also important, right? Like not overboard, but like pushing that envelope a little further. And I thought that the way you organized it was very interesting. I had a few questions, and certainly we are also opening up the Q&A for the audience. So please enter your questions in the Q&A box, or send them to me as messages, and I'll read them out to Sushant. In the meantime, let me just insert a couple of my questions. So one is about the fact of that I imagine that, within the government, there are people who do recognize that there are challenges, say, about the job or about the fact that, the power concentration is going outside, or the lack of technological access, or all sorts of issues that you flagged. Many of them, I imagine there are some people in the government who recognize that, I imagine that some of that information is understood and has also political implications, right? Like especially something like impact on jobs is something which is government would be very interested in ensuring that they mitigate. Um, how, but at the same time, on the flip side of that is also, I understand that the government also feels pressured no not left be left behind when there is a global race, arms race in this AI, on AI. So how do you, from policy perspective, balance these two instincts, and how do you think about it as a policy maker so that you are not too tilted on one side and you're able to, I mean, because I understand the concerns that you flagged, but I also understand the flip side, that there is a counter argument out there, which is to say that, see, we have to do all this and we have to go all in, because otherwise we'll be left behind, and that will be disastrous for India in the long run. And that is a pressure that most countries are facing across the world, right? And that is often, even in United States, it uses the argument to justify no holds barred, no unregulated expansion of let thousand AIs bloom kind of approach. So how do you think about that? How do you think about that balance?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for that question, Sandeep. It's a very important one. Um, I really wish the state was thinking about balancing these perspectives as much. I mean, if you like dig deeper in how policies are made and how the dynamics happen, a lot of these policy decisions are made for very different reasons compared to keeping societal interest in mind as such, which is a different conversation to happen altogether. Um, but I can give you some examples of where the state is trying to balance in the Indian state, especially this these two aspects of the AI space. One is the development of small language models and smaller models in general. So those are the models which are more environmentally sustainable. They can be trained on much less number of tokens. They are less energy intensive, water intensive. So SLMs are being developed by the government, and then AI applications. Where so like by the time of AI summit itself, India kind of figured out and is kind of clear about this fact that it is not really a contender in the frontier AI race. It's not going to develop frontier models, right? Like GPT or Claude or the other ones from China. So it is really kind of counting on its competency in the space of developing applications on top of frontier models which are already existing. And these applications have to address certain kind of socioeconomic issues in the country, right? So that is where the government, I would think, is. So they're also developing a lot of AI models which is trained in local languages. So there's a lot of language translation work is happening in AI space in India. Um, so there has been some developments in terms of contending the environmental issues, the scale issue, the extractive nature of AI itself. But a lot of the foundational problem will remain, no matter how small the model can become, how much you rely on AI application. If you're developing AI application, you're already kind of accepting frontier models. You're not negating them. So all the problems will remain. In fact, they would be further accentuated because like you are now building applications, so you need the frontier model also. So state is doing certain things, but it remains a lot needs to be still it remains to be seen in terms of how do we tackle fundamental problems like in education, for instance, like the way Norway has banned AI in a very early age of childhood, or how Australia has banned social media altogether for children under the age of 16. India is also considering something similar on social media, but the AI ban has not been talked about, especially in the early years of childhood. So even in university space, which is close to home for me, I see my students' ability of reading, writing, and even like talking about a topic that they love for even like a minute has plummeted tremendously in the last year. They cannot talk about anything for more than 30 seconds for that matter. They need a screen in front of them. Most of their writing is completely AI. They don't even read actual text. They read summaries of books. So basically robots are writing for robots in a way, like the writing is done by robots and it's being summarized by robots. So higher education space is being disrupted like none other. Similarly, labor force story is very, very critical one. If we are not contending these problems, the data colonialism problem or the kind of work of data annotation that our labor force has to do, which is very, very low paid, psychologically risky, all of those fundamental problems will not go away just because we are focusing on something else. And data center expansion itself, like amidst the kind of environmental crisis that we have, the amount of water, like most of Indian mega cities are water stressed at this point, and the land displacement that happens, there is hardly any democratic conversation with local communities when a data center is being located in any area. So all of those problems are there. At the same time, the state is doing certain things, but it is far from desirable, I would say.
And the other question I wanted to talk about is the idea of data colonialism that you mentioned, right? Which is very interesting, and especially with the way you laid out the fact that how much data is being extracted from global south countries, countries like India, and various ways, including that very interesting thing about the ego data collection. I'm sorry, I forget the exact term, but the basically of training of humanoid robots in the future, um, oh, and how that is feeding into this AI boom, and drawing parallels with the industrialization of colonial era. I suppose the, the perhaps the way of the colonial era industrialization. One of the things it also did was then deindustrialize places like India, right? Like that was part of the whole project, right? Like it was the fact that the artisan textile manufacturers which were in India were basically pushed out of the job so that there can be machine made, which was oftentimes at the in 19th century lower quality cloth was pushed into the market, and this was used by using the colonial power. This was essentially done. It seems to a certain degree, let me just pushing back a little bit on the questioning a little bit this data colonialism model. It seems to a certain degree, is it just the case that here, just that the all we're talking about is that in global south there's a lot of data that is being used by these companies, and they're not giving adequate share of whatever profit that they're getting out of that, or whatever value that they're creating out of that, they are not giving adequate share to the global south countries or the people that they are taking data from? Or is there something more further, more complicated, or additional layer of exploitation that is going on here, like there was during the colonial era industrialization?
Yeah. So, I mean, the other kinds of exploitation we have already talked about in terms of the physical infrastructure that is being put into the AI infrastructure in general, including land, water, electricity. Don't want to repeat that. But so here is how like the AI industry like frames this data colonialism thing in a good ethical sort of manner, in the sense that it's like you're training the model for good, like you're contributing in making the models better in tech development, in innovation. So innovation is this like very jargony word now, like where anything which is helping technology develop further without asking for whom and to what end and whether you are getting anything in return. So if you basically, we are all in the midst of a live experiment where we are all through our everyday practice training OpenAI and other AI models in this moment. Like the more you use this technology, so these models were unleashed in the world when they were not as good. When the earlier models of GPT came or Claude came, they were not as good, but they were unleashed anyhow. Similar with like self-driving cars, many of the emerging technologies are that way. They're unleashed in the society. Then we are in the midst of that experiment where we are training them through our real world data, everyday interaction and practice. And that is how they're getting better at it. Like self-driving cars, similarly, the more they drive on the road, they get better. Although these technology are not at all perfect, and they're far from perfect, they have a lot of issues, but at our cost, at humanity's cost, at society's cost, they get better for a private corporation, right? So that is how like the framing is kind of changed, in the sense that of course there is much more happening, in the sense that there is much more exploitation happening, there is much more the loss of creativity itself, for instance, where a lot of this conversation about super intelligent AI or artificial general intelligence or AI being this, like Elon Musk and many of these tech bros have talked about, that you will basically survive on universal basic income, that you don't need to do anything. And that is the kind of prosperity that a lot of this is the Silicon Valley tech bro thinking, where I mean, a lot of people without social scientific understanding kind of talk about societal development without really having any sort of training in that space. But they have a particular vision of future, which is largely driven by efficiency-related concerns, which works for them, but not for most of the society. Like we are not just driven by efficiency; we are also driven by equity. We are also driven by sympathy, empathy, compassion for each other. So we do kind of a lot of time, like we and you have like come across situation where we lose our time to help each other, but that is not how corporations and Silicon Valley thinks. For them, entire humanity, all of their life is just a puzzle to solve for efficiency. Everything has to be like short circuited into this equation where everything can be minimized, everything can be made as efficient, every variable can be made as efficient as possible. So we are caught up in that narrative, which is the larger sort of destruction which is happening, that alternative thinking of the world itself. One of the projects that I'm working on is about alternative futures of generative AI in 2040, for instance. I hold an alternative future of generative AI. I'm not saying that AI should be ruled out completely. I'm thinking about obviously taming the technology, making it work for us as a slave rather than as a master. The position that technology used to have. Technology was invented to help humankind, like bicycle, for instance. It is just sitting there for you to use it. And that is how technology should be used. Rather than it being an active sort of entity which is harnessing your psychological energy, your behavioral insights. That is what social media onwards or digital technologies have done. They are active sort of entities which is manipulating you, which is seeking your attention, which is changing your behavior. It happens in social media, and AI is like further in that line. But we want to go back to certain other kinds of technology which have made our life easier, like cars are there. Great example. Calculators, great example. There is bicycle, for instance, made our life so good, environmentally sustainable as well. So how do we turn it back to being a passive entity to be used at our whims and fancies rather than it dictating what needs to be done? So all this conversation about generative or artificial general intelligence, super intelligence, singularity, those that is like the bigger sort of damage that is happening, where some people are calling the shots on how the world should head further. So it is not just about the physical, all of that is there, like energy, water, land, data colonialism. But that is the bigger story where some people are deciding for us how a future is going to look like, right? So I think that is something that needs to be also talked about.
Also, while they are talking about UBI and all this optimistic future, they're also thinking internally, they're talking about the fact that we need to make $1 billion so that we don't get locked into permanent underclass, which will be ushered in after AI comes, takes
Of course,
over.
if you just looked at the stock evaluations of SpaceX and all these other companies that has happened, it is madness. Like, so one person is having $2 trillion, like, which is like sum total of more than sum total of many countries combined, which is crazy. In fact, and there is a lot of ill practices involved, unethical practices like lumping together XAI with SpaceX to to basically inflate the books. And the figures have already like kind of gotten through some kind of readjustment. So they have lost $600 billion in 3 days after SpaceX was listed. So there's a lot of this like circular economy happening where five companies have like kind of built a conglomerate together to develop AI, and they're investing in each other. So Nvidia is investing in OpenAI is investing in other arms of Nvidia, and they're like together making this AI bubble or financial bubble, which is leading to overvaluation. And then common people lose money in that race. When the bubble will burst, it is you and me who will lose the money. So that is the bigger like sort of scandal or racket which is going on, I would say.
There are several questions in the chat box, so let me just get to them quickly. One is by my colleague Mrikanika. She talks about given the rapid speed and dynamism of AI industry, is there even a need for such a massive push towards building data centers? Wouldn't investment in cloud services, at the very least, a hybrid approach that combines cloud and physical data centers, offer a path of least resistance as well as scaling potential for public and private sector? Um, yeah, but I think cloud also requires some sort of data center, right? Like otherwise, how do
Yeah, so I mean, this is a very important question, and India kind of prouds itself on this development of DPI, digital public infrastructure, and we have something called Airavat, which is India's cloud infrastructure for GPUs, for instance. So rather than every private company building its stockpile of GPUs, India has like one cloud-based GPU infrastructure, which is called Airavat, and it's kind of leasing out GPUs to startups, to different AI stakeholders to develop out of that. So it basically rents out GPUs at very, very economic rates, like a fraction of rate of the global market. Which is a good way to go about it. So again, like we are not ruling out of AI. We're talking about what are the more sustainable ways of thinking about this technology, which can put the genie back in the bottle, sort of. You know, smaller language models, very good. Cloud, very good. Whatever forms of technology which is more environmentally sustainable, uh, less scaled, not like monopolization of power and platforms. So like if you have OpenAI and Claude, like these are like really, really big monopolies. So monopoly is something that we have experienced from digital technologies booming. Like for instance, if you look at Uber, Ola, even like in the current moment, we have like this instant delivery like Blinkit versus Amazon is now trying to get in. Wherever monopolies have been created, Amazon is a classic example that has led to exploitation of consumers. So this government operated cloud infrastructure is definitely some of the good way forward. So I would totally agree with this. But again, this is the problem with the private markets, that the government cannot completely control it. We are in ultimately in a free market economy, being a democracy. So a lot of private players are also like moving on their own. So Adani, Ambani, these like people kind of collaborating with Meta and other big tech conglomerates in the West. In fact, like a state is anything like the slide on concentration of power, state is incentivizing these things as well. So that is where like the gap in rhetoric and reality I was talking about. Like in India, policy in general and state in general is a Janus-faced entity. It has like many faces. It will say something from one arm, it will do another thing from another arm. So we will have a like a position paper by Niti Aayog talking about responsible AI, AI for all. But at the same time, environmental ministry will be basically cutting corners and giving clearances like a fast track approval to AI data centers. So a lot of these things are contradictory, and that needs to be pointed out. And unfortunately, we are not in that space right now, in India at least, where there is one honest position being taken by the state. The society is moving at a different pace. Corporations are doing something else. The state is saying something, doing something else. And that is the nature of, I think, a lot of, I would say, emerging economies where the constraints are also different. For instance, at least in policy parlance, in policy discourses, they will say, oh, there is a lot of, India is in a developing phase, so we have a lot of constraint of economic development. But I need to ask, or we need to ask, economic development for whom? So if Meta is collaborating with Ambani's or Adani's to develop data centers, the lion's share is going to basically, the hyperscalers and big conglomerates all across the globe. So that is like the globalization of the globalization of profits and localization of risks. The local community pays the risk, but the profit goes to national level concentration of power or the global elites. So that is what is wrong. But all of that is happening, unfortunately, and there needs to be more. There needs to be tighter AI governance, at least in India at this point, because there is a lot of double standards, different things happening at the same time.
We have accumulated a lot of questions, so let me just quickly go through a couple of them, combine a couple of them here. One is from Abhishek Kumar, which is something that you just touched on as well, which is that AI development requires investment. What route can be taken here? So especially if we are talking about, thinking that Adani's, Ambani's, and the big conglomerates are not the ideal solution of, bringing in investment, then how do you think about investment in this space, right? Especially because it takes trillions of dollars. And let me just plug one more in so that you can answer a couple of questions at the same time, so that we can clear some of these questions. There are a lot of them, which is that very insightful presentation. Please share what political dispensation can make the AI story right for India. Which I suppose. Which rather than getting to that is the question to ask is that
that question that is like taking sides with political parties.
But I suppose that with the conversation here is also about in the United States, which you also pointed out, right? Like there is a lot of now political groundswell movement that is coming up from local communities upwards, right? And there are now senators and congressmen who are talking about pushing back against AI. Is there in Indian political conversation AI as a part of conversation at all, or is it still a technocratic conversation that state is having with itself and with other big businesses, but politics in general is really uninterested in? So is there a political conversation happening? So the both investment and the politics question.
No, so I'm working on actually two papers. One is about parliamentary discourse of AI in India, and another on media discourse of AI in India. There is a lot of political conversation happening on India, on AI in India, but all of that unfortunately is very, very techno optimistic and AI optimistic. They are all about deployment, scaling, and how fast can we do that. So they're basically echoing what the technological corporations are talking about. So it's the same kind of um, sheet they are basically reading from. So political conversation is happening. Unfortunately, not as much critical conversation happening. I mean, that is the role of opposition parties, but unfortunately, they have been weakened quite a lot in our context, in other contexts as well right now. But that is the role of political opposition at the moment, where if the government is kind of steering forward with a certain vision, they are the ones, they at least have the responsibility to put the brakes on that vision, and or like bring different kinds of heterogeneous ideas into the conversation in political discourse or in popular discourse. There's not so there is like a very, very homogeneous kind of political discourse in India. So that is what our research is also suggesting, and that is also the media discourse. Like media is also amplifying similar kinds of, and there's like a bigger political economy reason behind it, because a lot of media houses are being now bought by technological corporations and like big conglomerates in India. There's so basically, like if you look at the ownership structure of most of the media houses in India, they're like basically belonging to few big conglomerates and big private families. So that leads to homogenization of narrative as well. So no matter what you study, what you read, so for instance, I don't want to take names here, but there were only few critical media houses remaining till like last year, but they were also owned by certain companies or families. And now, like I can't listen to any of the Indian media, right? At least electronic media, I've completely shunned it out. So there is no critical conversation happening, because like they're all similar kinds of people who are owning the media houses, who are also very closely tied with the political power, and the political power is also amplifying their discourse. So there is pretty much no opposition. There's pretty much no critical conversation. And that is something that I love about the United States or like some of the Western countries, where democracy has actually flourished as an institutional idea rather than as an exception, where there is a lot of institutional structure standing still, which would not allow concentration of power like what we have now, right now, or like some of the other countries have led to. They still have structured sort of institutions which offer resistance. So if Trump would come up with some kind of another stupid idea, Supreme Court would halt that idea. And that has happened with a lot of his directives. Like Supreme Court has reversed the president's directive itself. In our case, it is hard to imagine. So that is something I would say, like there is a lot of conversation happening, but not as much political. In terms of different kinds of investment structure, that's a very good question, and the answer is community ownership, and that has happened with some of the other digital technologies like ride-hailing taxi rides, for instance. Kerala had this model of coming up with local community-owned taxis, which did not survive eventually for different reasons as a model. But there is a lot of different other examples from other countries where community ownership is the model to go forward with, rather than having a single very, very powerful business entity owning the whole thing. So we can definitely distribute this crowdsourcing, or community ownership is what you can think of. If community is directly involved in ownership itself, that model has to be sustainable. It can't be one person's vision. It can't be the benefit is not going to one person back. It is going to the community. We have examples from other sectors, like in dairy sector, for instance, Amul, or like whatever happened with, or like in financial sector with the small investment banks, with a lot of small and medium enterprises, that the women led enterprises that were created out of those kind of cooperative models. They are existing in different spaces. Those need to be tried out in technology sector. Unfortunately, that conversation is really, really marginal. I'm part of this generative AI network, which is a global sort of collaboration between 14 countries. And I was in Indonesia recently for this workshop, where whatever those people are talking about is exactly those kind of things. And that kind of conversation is really not happening in the common popular discourse, unfortunately, where alternative models of technological ownership is not talked about at all. Right now, like I think unfortunately our economic situation is also somehow where that is used by the political power to invite more foreign investment, and that leads to concentration of power in few hands rather than really trickling down in more equitable manner. Eventually India's underdevelopment card is used to invite foreign investment, but that doesn't really trickle down to the population. It remains at certain layer and doesn't really equitably go down. So community ownership is the answer, and there are examples happening in other sectors which can be implemented and emulated, I would believe.
I have a question from an anonymous attendee. Do we need a comprehensive AI Act that regulates not only AI systems but also underlying digital infrastructure such as data centers, data generation and governance, computational resources, and ethical standards? Or is a combination of separate sector-specific laws and existing regulatory frameworks sufficient?
So this is already happening. We don't have a comprehensive AI Act, and Government of India has also said that they're not going to bring in a comprehensive AI Act as such. We already have existing acts taking care of different aspects of the pipeline of AI. So we have something called DPDP Act now, which is Digital Protection Act, which basically takes care of data privacy and security. So data governance is a very important part of AI governance, which is already being taken care of by DPDP Act. Then you will have labor codes, for instance, which will be taking care of the labor aspects of data annotation work that is happening. Then we have something on semiconductors, for instance. We have another sort of policy, India's semiconductor policy, which is taking care of GPU sector and how to come up with how to think about semiconductor landscape entirely. So different components of laws which are existing, government is also resorting back to. So deepfakes, for instance, also another example. Although they are an AI phenomena, but they are being governed by existing IT laws. So government is also already kind of using this very, very sectoral and fragmented approach. I don't have a very, very clear sort of position on this, whether one is good or the other is bad, whether a comprehensive act. I mean, in general, I am not in favor of creating another new act because all it leads to is just like more paperwork, more like jargon, more bureaucracy. If you have India, that is the problem with the Indian landscape, like where policy implementation is the problem. So you have a lot of laws on the books, but the enforcement is really, really weak. So we don't need to come up with another law. We have, like, let us try to leverage the existing laws to the fullest extent that we can. And if there is a gap remaining, so DPDP was required. We didn't have a Unified Data Governance Act in place. We really had a very, very fragmented approach, which was not even up to the mark for social media, for digital era that we are in. So we came up with a new one. So that could be something wherever there are gaps, we can think of bringing in new legislation, but it is really not required. Because AI is not one thing. AI is raw material, AI is data, AI is labor, AI is deployment. So all of these need to be governed in the sectors that they are existing in, rather than thinking about AI, comprehensive AI Act.
There are a couple of questions about where the frontier models are headed. So I'll just combine them. In your opinion, where is the direction of frontier AI models headed? Recently, it was revealed that OpenAI and Anthropic's model are trained on cheaper Chinese models, even after accusing those same Chinese companies of using American models to train theirs. I didn't know this. Does this signify a shift in the power in the industry? And on this note, what is India's position on Chinese tech companies in this industry? And just to connect this with another question, which is, did NVIDIA's release of RTX Spark technology show a shift in the developing market for SLMs? Is this the ideal future for AI models?
I'm so not the person to answer these questions. But to think about the earlier one, I really wouldn't answer the NVIDIA one. But the question is like, is this the ideal future? I mean, SLMs generally, I mean, you have to think about these things more fundamentally rather than thinking through these examples. SLMs are better than LLMs. In the sense they are more environmentally sustainable, they are less extractive in nature, they are less resource intensive in general. They can also be catered more to the local context. So like if you have LLMs, which is trained on billions or trillions of tokens, then that is not really catering to the local context. So for instance, and those were the initial issues with gender bias, for instance, with LLMs. Like if you feed the idea of beauty in OpenAI back in the days, in one of the chat GPTs, it would come up with a very, very Western centric notion of what beauty is. But now if you have a SLM which is trained in Indian context, it would give you a more accurate example, which is more kind of in alignment with the values of the local context that you're talking about. So definitely SLMs in theory is a good example. It's a better way to go about thinking about AI in general. There are other ways of AI thinking about AI also beyond language models itself. That is also a conversation to be had. Language models is just one kind of AI which is using which is just relying on natural language processing to come up with an output, which is basically a textual output. But there are other kinds of AI. There's predictive AI, there is robotic AI. So you have to think about like a whole range of AI technology rather than this is the moment of LLMs that we are living in. So, but we really need to like zoom out and think about other kinds of AI which has been cornered or marginalized in this conversation. So definitely there are other options to think about. And in terms of where is the direction of frontier AI models really headed, um, I don't know, it's like really, really tech insider conversation, like they were really trained on China. I mean, this kind of thing is happening. I know, like, it is called distillation or something. Initially, they were blaming the Chinese model for distilling OpenAI's ChatGPT, and now they're like, I mean, I don't know who is like really distilling who. Doesn't really matter. It is all like similar kind of problem for me as far as LLMs are concerned. Um, I mean, as far as my reading goes of the AI industry, like US is taking a lead in frontier AI model. China is trying to come up with open source sort of answer to the closed models of AI. So they're really trying to prove, like with the Faber and Mythos model, like China has just released their own open sourced models, which is almost similar in power to Mythos and Fable. So they're playing different kinds of games. US is playing really closed model, corporate sort of model. China is trying to really trying to answer that with frugal, open sourced sort of models, which can be used and deployed by other global south and other countries in general. Um, I mean, it is up to you. I mean, in terms of like your value framework, like what do you really prefer? What kind of world do you want to envision? Like I prefer obviously open sourced. I mean, it is kind of a no-brainer for me to think about. I mean, why would I want corporate concentration of power? So I would definitely, in that way, I would try to lean towards the open source models, and wherever they are being developed, it would be good for AI or technology race in general, I would say. Yeah.
But what is India's position generally? Would you have some
So
sense of?
that's a very geopolitical conversation to be had, and in general, there is a lot of adversarial rhetoric in that area. Like India, I mean, and that is fueled geopolitically, which is understood, and that is what happened with TikTok when India banned that Chinese company, ByteDance, which owned TikTok. I think still there is a lot of rivalry there. India is I think in terms of AI development in general, most of the collaborations, if you look at, they're with big tech companies of US, some with France, let's say with Mistral, there are a few conversations happening, but none as such with Chinese companies so far, because there is that like kind of deep sort of suspicion going on between the nations in terms of data privacy, security, national security in general. So all of that has been like entangled together, and China and India doesn't, I think, share that kind of relationship which US and India has been sharing on tech development end. So I would say there is like general skepticism towards Chinese tech companies in general compared to the US ones.
Last question I just wanted to add, because I understand that one of your research projects is also looking at caste bias in AI, and I just was wondering if you could give us a quick brief of what have been your findings, or how is that research going?
Yes, so that is a very important project that we're working on. I'm working with my students on that. So we are red teaming. Red teaming is an exercise where you kind of stress test AI models by feeding biased sort of prompts in the AI model. So you would say that, okay, like lower caste people are like this or poor people are like this. So it's a biased prompt. And then you would see how the AI reacts. Does it like resist? Does it try to conform with you? So that is the kind of jailbreaking stress testing kind of model which red teaming is. And that is what we are doing with two of the AI models, ChatGPT and Claude, and we're trying to analyze caste bias in different policy areas of education, welfare, public subsidies, and see through structured set of prompts run by like a whole group of students um, to see what kind of biases are in there. In terms of findings, um, it is interesting in the sense that it is not overtly caste biased. It is more subtle in the sense that what kind of rhetorical strategy it uses to kind of balance its response. So it would not say outright that Dalits are lazy and that is the reason they are poor. They would really frame this in the sense that in a very subtle sort of manner by privileging certain kind of backgrounds, kind of always talking about lower caste people with along with conversation on historical backwardness, but the upper caste's privilege is not talked about in historical terms, that they are also privileged because of the historical situation that was there. But the lower caste's disadvantages are talked always in historical manner. So there is those kinds of biases at play where certain kinds of privilege are considered default, but lower caste or caste marginalization is taken as sometimes some sort of exceptional sort of situation, which leads to different kinds of continuity of bias in the AI model. It is not completely bereft of caste bias, but it kind of furthers caste bias in a very subtle manner. It also does a lot of false balancing or hedging in conversation, that it would say, okay, this is right, but this is also right. Especially in caste bias, like, oh, reservation is correct, but there's also abuse of reservation. So that is not a valid position to have, especially if something is legally settled, constitutionally settled. So reservation, for instance, in India is a constitutionally settled idea. You can't say that it is good, but it's also bad. So if something is so that is something that we are seeing in the findings a lot, that there is a lot of false balancing happening between two very different positions. One position might be correct, other position might be wrong, but it would say that just for the sake of argumentation. So it has this kind of um, thesis antithesis kind of approach, where it would talk about a good idea but also bring out point in opposition, to just to make the whole answer look more balanced, but the other side would not be as important, as equally valid if you look at the policy evidence, but it would not admit that as much. So there's a lot of false balancing, there's a lot of hedging happening, a lot of indecisiveness in terms of taking a moral position on caste bias. It would always take a very diplomatic sort of balanced sort of position. Those are some things that we are witnessing, but we will be releasing findings soon when it is ready to be published.
Thanks. This was a very interesting conversation and a very insightful one. But there's one errant comment in the Q&A that caught my eye. This is that, AI development seems to not stop no matter what legislation is put in place. And I suppose, I mean, the larger outcome of this, or the reducto ad absurdum version of this, is to say is that the way it is happening right now is the only way it will happen. AI is inevitable in the shape and form that it is happening right now, and I think that it's very important for us to recognize that it is not. It is something created by human, and the context within which it is emerging is also human. And we can change that, and there can be a different shape to this AI, which is something that sort of unfortunately keeps getting forgotten. And there's
Yeah.
this sense that this is inevitable in this particular form, and there is no other
I will
option.
I will pause you there to just like emphasize this point of human agency in tech development. So like when you make AI into some kind of alien sort of force which is inevitable upon humankind, it has agency of its own, it will take its own life, it is nobody can stop it, and it is bound to happen. It is a very peculiar kind of technological rhetoric that tech industry has used for all kinds of emerging technology, for nuclear, for space, for biotechnology, now for AI. It always has to come up with something to survive itself. Like it's a marketing sort of idea, pretty much. That is also what was also leading to the bubble building of AI, the financial bubble, because investors are now realizing that it is not really leading to as much of return. So MIT came out with this report again, like 95% of industry they found zero ROI on using AI in their business processes. So that is already happening. A lot of these enterprises are struggling really hard to justify investment in AI. That is the reality. But then you have to survive with something. So technology companies have invented this kind of rhetoric where AI has its agency on its own, and we are like really weak sort of stakeholder in this whole conversation. But we need to grab that agency back and kind of say that technology has been shaped by humankind. We are the ones who are developing technologies, including AI. So the tech development industry can take like conscious decisions to make AI debiased, to make AI sustainable, to again shape the technology in a direction where it can be a passive tool to be used by us. And that can happen. And for that, like a whole set of conversation and a whole sort of interests need to be dismantled, which is the bigger problem, because the way the globe works, the way the world works, it is this certain kinds of political economy in place that is hard to dismantle. So if Nvidia has trillions of dollars, it is not just going to sit there, going to be kicked out of market by a bunch of socialist progressive protesters, they are controlling all sides of conversation. Similarly for OpenAI, or like that's why they're buying all sides. So OpenAI is coming to India, selling its licenses to students and teachers, calling it AI driven learning and innovation. While like it's like tobacco company investing in health. That is the kind of greenwashing, ethics washing which is being done by a lot of AI companies. They're trying to win all sides. So they know that their product is harmful. So OpenAI is being sued left, right, and center by people in US. So a child committed suicide in California because ChatGPT suggested it to commit suicide. That is the conversation it was happening. It basically leads to psychophancy. It kind of always agrees with what you are feeling, what you are going through. Child was lonely. It kind of he was already suicidal in thinking. ChatGPT agreed. It gave the child suggestions on how to build the news, how to hang it, how to keep it hidden, how will people not notice it. So it is complacent in such kind. And now the parents are suing the company. Similarly, on copyright aspect, a lot of media houses have sued OpenAI and other AI companies left, right, and center. All of that is happening. So you have to do something else to survive, and that is where all this techno-optimistic narrative comes in, and also this inevitability of AI as a force upon humankind, which is out to be there, happens. Anyway, I'll let you complete your thought, but that is something I needed to let out.
No, I mean, yeah, I mean, as inevitably it went into a very dark place by the end of it. Unfortunately, that is also part of the psychological harms are also part of AI conversation, which we don't really have good handle on. But as somebody else who teaches, I know that the impact of AI on teaching has been pretty disastrous. But in any case, thank you very much. This was a very insightful conversation. Hopefully, we can have you again for some more conversation. And thank you, everybody, for joining. I apologize if I couldn't get to your question. There were many, as this topic always engenders a lot of interest and a lot of discussion, and all of us have interesting opinions about it. So hopefully we'll keep this conversation going. And in the meantime, thank you very much. Bye.